All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nicky will be doing our top 10 quarterbacks in college football for the 2025 season. We'll start with some honorable mentions and then jump right in 10, going all the way down to 1. Starting off with Luke Altmaier. This is a guy that I expected more from 2 years ago at Illinois. It was a tough season for him in his first season in Champaign. But this past year, he played lights out for this football team. I was very happy with what he was able to accomplish. This is a guy that I think can certainly rip the ball, in that intermediate, the short range. I think he's pretty good with his accuracy in that regard. He had only 6 interceptions this past year. Has some underrated mobility as well, one with 4 rushing touchdowns. So I think this is a guy that's certainly creeping his way towards being in the top 10. After that, you look at Kevin Jennings, a guy for SMU that, they kept forcing him into that starting lineup, Nick. Preston Stone in 2023 played pretty well, but early on in the season, they kept going with this 2-quarterback system because they wanted him on the field, and it caused the offense to really struggle, and then they fully turned to him as the starter, and the offense really took off, ended up leading them to the college football playoff, of course. They had a pretty weak schedule. They went head-to-head with Clemson. He had a very good game in the ACC title. And then at Penn State, though, he ended up throwing 3 interceptions, had some horrendous turnovers. That atmosphere and that defense absolutely got to him that day, which is going to keep him from being top 10. Despite being a very impressive dual-threat quarterback, he did have 28 total touchdowns, 11 interceptions, though. Certainly is going to hold him back just a little bit. But a guy that has a lot of upside coming into this year. Darian Mensah transfers to Duke, big money deal, leaving Tulane. He was very impressive. It was a good quarterback room the Green Wave had last year, and he beat out all of them as a young player. And he played very well, leading to that big payday. 2,700 yards, 22 touchdowns, 6 picks, completing 66%. He showed some impressive arm talent and some nice poise as well, Nick. I watched Tulane a lot because, I had a future bet on them last year. So I was able to watch Mensah a good bit, and I was impressed for the most part. I was like, man, this kid can certainly ball. Josh Hoover, he's my favorite on this list from TCU. Of course, you're going to put up big stats, right? But this is a guy that can really throw the football with some good velocity, some good arm strength. This is a guy that can get you 45 touchdowns and 4,500 yards next year, Nick. This is a great underdog bet to win the Heisman Trophy, I would say. Nearly had 4,000 yards this past year. Fernando Mendoza looking to do some good things with Indiana, leaving California to replace a player in Curtis Wark that was tremendous for IU, leading them to the playoffs. And I think Rocco Beck, this guy's a gamer, made a lot of big plays with his legs throughout the year for Iowa State, like what he was able to do through the air. Now, of course, he's going to be losing his top 2 pass catchers. They got every single target for that offense, so he's really going to have to elevate this year with some lesser-known receivers. I think overall this is a nice mentions list, Nick. Who's your favorite one on here? I know I just gave you a lot of information.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with Mendoza to start. I think the fit at Indiana is going to be phenomenal for him this season. At 6'5", 225, I love the frame and the arm strength on him coming out of Cal. Really did elevate the offense and looked a lot better this year. 68% comp rate, 3,000 yards passing, 16 touchdowns to 6 picks in 2024. Really good numbers there. Had a really solid season, in my opinion. Prior to that, the year before, he had about 1,700 yards passing and 14 touchdowns and 10 picks. So increased the touchdown number, cut down on the interceptions, was a lot more accurate, looked a little more comfortable in the pocket, had a lot more attempts as well, about 150 more attempts in 2024. He was really involved in the offense because Jaden Ott was not having the best season at Cal, so Mendoza had to step up and be a leader. I think Mendoza can really elevate an Indiana team that I think is still in a really good spot despite losing some talent to pieces. I think Mensah is a fun player to watch coming from Tulane. I think he'll be really good in this Duke offense. I'm curious if he'll use his legs a bit more. Had 60 carries last year for 132 yards and 1 touchdown. Want to see if he'll get that involved a little bit more this year. 2,700 yards passing and 22 touchdowns for Mensah is a pretty solid number overall. But I think the rest of these honorable mentions are really solid players. Obviously, Josh Hoover has that sky-high potential. Nearly 4,000 yards passing last year. Really could definitely get above that this year and above 30 touchdowns. He's a guy that's just so accurate. Has a solid weapons room down there at TCU as well. He could really be in line for a great season.
A great wide receiver room they have at Indiana as well, so I think Mendoza, you're going to be on point with that one come December, Nick. He's going to have a great year. Getting things started, number 10 on our list, Haynes King. This is a guy that, was a hyped-up player at Texas A&M just a couple years back. Things didn't really work out for him. He transfers to Georgia Tech, and he's coming off 2 strong seasons where this is the leader I want going into the 2025, Nick, going on the road against some tough opponents. He's seen it last year. Unfortunately, the second half of the year, he was incredibly injured, so his shoulder was not, in use for them. So they ended up going 2-2 when he was injured there late in the season. They beat Miami, though, with him only throwing 6 passes because, he does such a great job of running this offense. And, of course, he still was able to utilize his legs to a great tune at 93 yards in that game against Miami. The Georgia game is the one where people who didn't know about him, they know about him now, Nick. He had, over 400 yards in that game, 300 passing, 110 rushing with 3 scores. I mean, he put on a clinic that day. Unfortunately, though, his fumble late in the game costed them that contest. They should have beat Georgia, Nick, quite frankly, and the offense looked so good in that contest. King overall, he had 25 total touchdowns and 2 picks. Obviously, he should be fully healthy this year, and he'll get back to having better production through the air. Very proud of what Haynes King has accomplished this year, Nick, and this is the ideal leader to take in the battle as an underdog.
This is an ideal leader. I like what King can do. I think he's a really talented quarterback, really strong physical runner, had a really solid season protecting the ball right, only had 2 interceptions on the season, including one of those being in the bowl game. Prior to that, his only interception in the regular season was in week 2 against Georgia State. He really protects the ball, has some high completion percentage in a lot of these games as well. He's a very accurate quarterback that can really stand in the pocket when he does throw. 72% comp rate last year was really solid, 2,000 yards passing and 14 touchdowns through the air. The rushing is obviously a big factor in the offense as well. 587 yards rushing and 11 scores last year for him. A bit of a dip in production in terms of passing and rushing from 2023, but I think if you can find a happy medium between 2023 and 2024, this will be a quarterback that can really elevate this Georgia Tech offense. He's a big physical player that can certainly find a way to force touchdowns on the ground or through the air. Had 16 interceptions in 2023, had 2 in 2024. Somewhere in the middle ground there, somewhere in the middle ground in terms of the passing touchdowns as well. I think Georgia Tech will be in line for a very strong season. This is a kid that's still got a lot of room to grow, a really strong runner, and really solid in the pocket as well.
Moving to number 9, Sam Levitt, from the mean streets of Westland, Oregon. This guy was impressive in his second year in college football at 6'2", 200, especially since he only had really one pass catcher in Jordan Tyson the entire year. And even with his injury late in the season, he was still able to put together some nice performances against Iowa State. He led them to a big victory in Arlington. And then, of course, he was, putting up a resilient effort against Texas in the playoff game. Of course, he had Cam Scadaboo as his co-part there in the backfield. They're not going to have that this year, so he's certainly going to have to elevate his game. I think the receiving group's in much better standing than it was last year in terms of versatility. And this is a guy that was pretty consistent, Nick, again, with only one pass catcher, really. If you look at the numbers, there's one guy commanding targets, and Levitt still managed to have 2,800 passing yards and 24 touchdowns, only had 6 picks. 4 of those came, with 4 straight games early on in the season. So as the year went on, he was much better, especially as they entered conference play in terms of being able to protect the football. And his efficiency was great, especially against some tough opponents. Sam Levitt, this is another one of those guys that can really boom this year, especially that he'll have some more help. But the offense is probably going to be more about a pass game-centric unit this fall. So Levitt's certainly going to have to continue his great play.
Levitt will certainly have to elevate his arm strength this year, and they're going to have a bit of a wider room to throw to. Had one target really all of last year, which certainly hampered this offense through the air. 61% comp rate, 2,800 yards passing, and 24 touchdowns to 6 interceptions is a solid number. Previously at Michigan State, didn't play a whole lot there, ended up at Arizona State. Took over a team that was pretty bad and got into the college football playoff, was solid on the ground as well, used his legs in the red zone when he needed to. The 443 yards rushing and 5 scores, 4 yards per carry is a solid number. I think he's a very accurate quarterback. I think he is starting to get a lot of love for the right reasons. He's developing, continuing to grow his game in multiple different facets here. The offense will look a little bit different for Arizona State this year with no more Scadaboo, but I think they've added some pieces out of the portal that'll make the wide receiver room just a little bit better. I think Levitt's a player that's underrated. People might say, it's a bit of a stretch putting him in the top 10, but I think this is a kid that's got sky-high potential. We saw him in the game, in the Big 12 title game, where he had a really strong, accurate day, hit some nice deep balls in that game, that he could really find a way to develop and turn himself into a star. I think he's a really strong quarterback and certainly worthy of making the top 10 of this list.
Now moving to number 8, maybe a bit of a controversial one, kind of a forgotten player here, right? Carson Beck. This is a guy that last year entered as a perennial draft selection on most people's big boards. He was a Heisman favorite as well, and now he ends up transferring to Miami. Nick, I mean, just what a wild turn of events for Beck, a guy that's 6'4", 220. From the statistical standpoint, he still had a pretty good year, right? Almost 3,500 yards passing, 28 touchdowns. The problem was just something was off for the most part of the year. He had 12 interceptions. He had 4 games of 2+ picks. So it was really only a couple of games, about 5 of them here, that really jacked up that number in terms of, turnovers. He also struggled with fumbles and whatnot. This is a guy who at times was on point, Nick. The Auburn game was really good for him. The second half of the Alabama game was just phenomenal from what he was able to do. You're trying to will them back from a big deficit. Just the accuracy for the most part was not great. Timing of his pass catchers was off. Ball placement precision, ability to see the field at times was incredibly inconsistent. You've seen that against Florida, where he was just forcing throws and kept the Gators into that contest. Of course, he had 30 drops as well. His pass catchers didn't seem to do him any favors when he was on point. Just a tough season for him overall, Nick. What do you make of Carson Beck, and do you think he can get things on the right track after, now he has to replace Cam Ward, who had the nation's top offense last year? What's your opinion on this prospect?
Player who's received a lot of unwanted attention that I'm sure he didn't want, off the field, with his relationship with his girlfriend, who was a superstar basketball player at Miami, that got a lot of traction in that regard. Lane Kiffin taking jabs at him recently and saying, in a media hit that, why would Miami pay the money they did? Miami gives them a big amount of money. And I think Beck is still a phenomenal prospect. I think he's still an incredibly talented quarterback. I don't blame him for coming back for another year of college. He does need to polish some things. He just didn't look himself last year. The 12 interceptions is a complete outlier and really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. When you look at the stats, some of the key games were his worst games. At Alabama, 3 interceptions. At Texas, 3 interceptions. Against Florida, 3 interceptions. Those are bad numbers and unforgivable. Had a terrible game against Texas in the game that they did end up winning, but 56% comp rate, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions is not good enough. Fought back and certainly played a hell of a second half against Alabama, but his early mistakes in that game put them behind against the Tide and put them in a tough spot there. The loss at Ole Miss was really a poor performance as well. 186 yards passing and 1 interception, just didn't do a whole lot that day. Looked rattled in that game. I believe he also fumbled in that game. He's still incredibly talented player, right? When he plugged into this offense, they expected him to still be really good. And, yes, over 3,000 yards passing in 2 seasons is impressive. 3,900 yards in 2023, 24 touchdowns, 6 picks. But the doubling the interceptions, less passing, and I think the biggest issue for me is the steep drop in comp rate despite a similar number of passes. 72% in 2023, a 64% comp rate in 2024. That's a hefty drop, about an 8% drop, 8-9% drop, depending on when the numbers you look at that. So that's really poor if you're trying to make the case for Carson Beck here. He has to be more accurate this year, has to stay focused. It's certainly, I think, a system that you can plug a quarterback into have a lot of success. So I think he will have success at Miami. I think he'll continue to show that he's still a really talented prospect heading into the draft next year, but he's got to find a way to be more accurate, got to find a way to have better completion percentage. Obviously, like you said, some of the drops are a part of the problem as well. I think the talent at Miami will help with that, but he's got to keep his head focused this year if he wants to play himself back into that top 5 quarterback in college football conversation. Otherwise, he could slide out of this top 10 entirely.
Looking at number 7, DJ Lagway, a more modest rating from us. I think it's certainly appropriate. This is a guy who certainly showed elite arm, strength, very good downfield accuracy, even despite being a bigger player at 6'3", 240. Has some good speed and some nice moves as a runner. Has a baseball-like stroke when he throws the football. I think he's got some good elusiveness as well when the pocket breaks down. This guy showed plenty of mental lapses, poor decisions versus coverage, leading to some bad turnovers. Efficiency was a big problem. 54% in SEC play. And this is a guy who has phenomenal arm talent, Nick. He'll be, top 3 in that conversation of all these quarterbacks, right? But I think, can he be more than a gunslinger? Will he evolve into more than that this year? More of a field general that can work all areas of the field. The game against Tulane, he had horrendous turnovers. 2 picks where he just throws it into the middle of the field and doesn't see anybody sitting there. He didn't work that area of the field very well, Nick. Again, he's a great gunslinger. You're throwing the ball downfield, tremendous. 259 yards and 7 completions against Kentucky, 456 on 18 against Samford, or they just kept airing it out. That's an example of what this player can do for you. He had a big, touchdown downfield against Georgia before he got hurt in that one. So there's a lot of great qualities here. But again, he needs to mold into more than just a guy who can make plays downfield, and I think that's why he's so low on this list for me.
Yeah, he is low on this list because he still has a lot of wait and see. Can you develop and turn him into a star? They got to polish a whole lot. Florida, the ceiling is sky high on them, in my opinion. This is a team that could be really good this year, but a lot of it rests on whether or not DJ Lagway develops and turns into a more comfortable prospect. 6% comp rate, about 2,000 yards passing last year, 12 touchdowns and 9 picks, also decently on the ground as well, about 100 yards rushing. Certainly can find a way to get some more rushing yards this year. That arm strength is phenomenal, right? But it seems like he just kind of sprays it sometimes, like he alluded to the game against Tulane, where he had 2 bad interceptions. I think it's sort of a wait-and-see approach with DJ Lagway. Can he develop into a complete star for this offense? I think it's certainly possible, and I think the jury is still certainly out. He's had some decent games, but he also had some bad games where he made a lot of mistakes. Struggled against Georgia prior to his injury, struggled against, Tennessee in a game where he filled in that one. Didn't have the greatest game against Florida State in a win or against Ole Miss in a win, in my opinion. So I think this is a player that you can kind of develop a wait-and-see approach. He's a kid that's got a lot of potential, and you're certainly slotting him at this position because you think the potential is there, putting him at number 7. But I think this is a kid that's going to have to continue to develop and grow if he wants to stay on this list. Sky high potential, but certainly the jury is still out on DJ Lagway.
Move to number 6, Arch Manning. Everyone's awaiting, what he's going to be able to do as a full-time starter this year. Of course, being a former top-ranked recruit, his family's nothing but legends as well. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on this young kid to step into college football and be great. I think, between 6 and 10 is accurate for him on this list because I don't want to just look at a last name and a recruiting ranking and assume that he's going to be the top player in CFB, right, Nick? I don't think that's certainly appropriate. We got a great sample size, 3 games in September when Quinn Ewers was hurt, balled out against UTSA. L.A. Monroe, he completed about 52%, had 2 picks in that one. It was much more efficient, much better against Mississippi State in the start the next week. After that, you didn't really see him much the rest of the year. Occasionally you saw him. They'd bring him in when it comes to rushing packages to try and get some things going with his legs. But overall, I liked what I saw. He's, of course, impressive athletic ability and rushing skills. He's a real nice cross-body thrower as well. Nice, high release. You can obviously tell he gets that from his family. He's certainly been developing that, Nick. It's incredibly smooth, very beautiful. Throws a great deep ball as well with good velocity. Shows good calm feet. I think he has a good eternal clock as well. The diagnosis on RPOs was impressive. He did have 4 fumbles, though. And how will this calmness translate to tough road environments? Well, we're going to find out very quickly, Nick. They open up the year in Columbus.
I'm certainly investing in the stock in Arch Manning right now. I thought that he was such a talented prospect coming out of high school. People said it was overrated. It was just the last name. He was playing low competition. But I was impressed by what I saw in the high school film, and I'm impressed with what I've seen so far. I think this could potentially be a guy that gets to your number 1 quarterback in college football by the end of the season. I think the potential is certainly there. I think he'll seamlessly plug into this offense. We saw him last year have a lot of success. And, early on playing in those games against Mississippi State, 325 yards, passing, 84% comp rate, 2 touchdowns. Really impressive numbers there. Had a good day against ULM, had a good day against UTSA as well. Some of the picks against ULM, certainly one of the film, when you look at mistakes-wise, 2 interceptions there, certainly something you want to see him trying to improve to avoid making mistakes like that, but had a solid day against UTSA, was solid on the ground as well, being involved in those packages where they got him involved to sort of throw the defense off a little bit. I thought that was quite fascinating last year. 67% comp rate in the small sample size, just about 1,000 yards passing and 9 touchdowns. Had 4 rushing touchdowns as well. I think the sky is certainly sky-high potential here for Arch Manning. Right now, slotting him in at 6 makes a lot of sense because I think the 5 guys in front of him all have proven that they can compete and play in college football, and he has not played a full season or a full body of work. But I think after you get a full body of work this year, he could certainly rise to number 3, number 2, or even number 1 quarterback in college football. I'm buying the stock on Arch Manning. I think he'll have a phenomenal season. I think he'll fit really well in this Texas offense. I love what I see from the potential is certainly there, and he's a hell of a quarterback so far. 6'4", 225. The frame is phenomenal. The arm strength is really good. The accuracy, that arching deep ball, like you said, is really impressive. I think the sky-high potential for Arch Manning, and he's going to have a phenomenal season.
Move to number 5, Drew Allar. A bit of a forgotten guy, it seems, this offseason, Nick, because no one's really been talking about him after he ended the year pretty well. People even considered, him as a guy that potentially entered the NFL draft. I'm glad he didn't. He's going to stay put. And he's got a great opportunity this year to lead Penn State to a national title. A lot of people think this is probably the best team that the Nittany Lions have had in quite some time with all what they return. And this year, you certainly saw him evolve in terms of being more of a field general this year. Made some great passes week 1 against West Virginia. Remember that contest? I didn't think that'd be a close one, Nick. I know we all offseason long talked about that game. And Allar put on a clinic for the most part. He did have inconsistencies in that game, though, but he made some great throws. And you've seen it against USC. He had almost 400 yards, had to lead them from behind in that one. You're certainly still waiting for him to step up against the tougher competition like Ohio State. Against Oregon, he had a relatively good game, but he did have a bad interception that ended up sealing the deal for the Ducks. The completion rating against Boise State wasn't great, but he had a lot of great throws in that game that also his receivers weren't able to come up with. Had 16 drops overall on the year. And then against Notre Dame, that was a game where he also makes a horrendous decision. He didn't really play that good throughout that contest, Nick. Elite defense, of course, but that decision there at the end, put their season to a close in just very devastating fashion. This is a guy with great arm talent, great quality, 6'5", 235. He can continue to elevate his game. This team's going to see great results, but they were right there, Nick. I mean, they played a relatively good game, Penn State did. They could have been in the national championship, and that mistake made it so they never found out.
I think the pros and cons of Drew Allar, why he slots in at number 5, I think it's a perfect fit for him. I think the pros are certainly there, right? This is a kid that's really developing and turning into a really solid quarterback that can lead it from the pocket, a really solid field general type player. 3,300 yards passing this past season, 24 touchdowns, 8 picks, was really solid and confident, 66% comp rate, had 300 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns as well. Certainly, I think he benefits from returning. I think Penn State greatly benefits from his return as well. Penn State certainly have an opportunity. If not now, then when are they going to win a national title? I think this has to be the year. They have to go, the rubber meets the road here. They got to go out and find a way to win a national title with Drew Allar behind under center for them. I think he's a really talented quarterback that's accurate and really solid in the pocket. The 60% comp rate I think was really solid for him. I was really impressed with that. 66.5 that is was really solid throughout the season. The only thing for me is the downside is the untimely interceptions. It feels like every single interception he threw was majorly costly and untimely. When you look at the one against Notre Dame in the national title and the national semifinal, completely cost them the game there, right? That was a complete bad mistake against Ohio State, a bad turnover that put them in a bad position in that game, put them behind the 8 ball in a game that was super close. Against USC, 3 bad interceptions that led the team going to overtime, mistake after mistake in that one. A bad interception against Bowling Green. I think people forget about that. He threw a bad interception week 2 against Bowling Green in a game that was significantly closer than it should have been. Did not look good in that game either against a subpar opponent with 200 yards passing. And the interception in that one. Not a great showing. Had a good game against West Virginia, good game against Illinois and Kent State as well. Some other games were solid throughout the season. I think, the potential is certainly there for him to continue to develop, and I think he is a player that has incredible pros but incredible cons as well. Complete 180 sometimes with him and his play style. He's in a good system. He's with a good team. I think it made sense for him to stay. Let's see what he can do this year. But at number 5, I feel like that's a really perfect spot for him because the 4 guys in front of him, I think, just have that extra edge that elevate them a little bit more than Drew Allar has right now.
And the one you forgot to mention on there was the one against Oregon. They had a chance to tie it up there, throws a jump ball down the sideline. It gets picked off. And he had one against USC that was at the end of half on a Hail Mary. So not all of them were on him. He did have 2 of them that weren't great. But the third one, Nick, I'll go ahead and give him a bit of a flyer on that one because it was on a Hail Mary. Moving to number 4, John Mateer. I absolutely love watching this player. If you've seen his tape, I'm sure you smile just watching it because this kid is so much fun to watch. Obviously, he steps into tougher competition moving from Washington State to Oklahoma, a team that badly needs its offense to play much better this year if they want to compete. A guy that has, a crafty variety of different arm angles. He's a great runner. He has speed, had 15 touchdowns. He's a nifty runner as well. Quick change of direction, strong arm. He has a quick flick. He can often look to scramble too quickly, though, is one of his negatives. Sometimes he can put too much air on the ball. Needs to find consistency and some improved mechanics. This is, such a fun player to watch, Nick. Obviously playing for a team that was an underdog, and most of their contests are, against Boise State, they got smoked, and then late in the year. They lost 4 in a row. I guess they weren't underdogs in those games. But Mateer was putting on a clinic regardless, Nick. And if he had some defense on the other side, this team could have been magical. Well, I can tell you at Oklahoma, he'll have defense this year. It's up to him to play up to this competition he'll be facing, though, Nick. Is it going to be a hit or a miss, or do you think he'll play very well?
I think it's going to be a hit. You were very high on this Oklahoma team privately. You and I have talked about Oklahoma a lot the past couple weeks. You are extremely high on them. You think they're going to smash their over win total this year, and a lot of that is because John Mateer could really elevate this team and take them to the next level. I love the defense they have. I think Venables is a phenomenal defensive coach. I think plugging in a quarterback like John Mateer will take this team to the next level. There were some games that were iffy, right? The game against Wyoming end of the season was poor, right? 182 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick, and a low-scoring loss against Wyoming. That's bad. But outside of that, I think the positive games were positive. I think of the shootout win against San Jose State in overtime where he had 390 yards passing, 4 touchdowns. Really impressive stats there. Had 5 touchdowns against FCS opponent week 1. Also had a really solid game against Boise State despite the loss. Put up a clinic against Hawaii. 85% comp rate, 300 yards passing, and 3 touchdowns. 7 interceptions last year. Some bad interceptions early in the season, but I think he kind of polished that as the season went on. Yes, there was a bad interception against Wyoming. That was just a poor game. I consider it a mulligan here. Really solid on the ground as well. The 15 rushing touchdowns is certainly something you want to keep an eye on. 4.5 yards per carry, I think is a really impressive number. 826 yards rushing is solid as well. 3,000 yards passing. I think he can certainly get to that number again this year. I think he'll be really solid at Oklahoma. There's some solid weapons here. Not, the best weapons in the world, but I think there's some guys that are decent enough for this offense. I think it's tough step up in competition. I certainly think that's a fair point, but you're going to plug this kid in. I think he's going to have a lot of room and develop to grow. Spring practice will certainly treat him well, getting some more opportunities to grow and play with some SEC level talent. This is a kid that's got sky high potential. I think he fits in at 4 here because he has proven that he can play strong football at a good offense like Wazoo. We saw what Cam Ward did. He made the move over to Miami and got immediately better and put up incredible numbers there as well. So you can see a similar type effect here for John Mateer at Oklahoma.
He also had 197 rushing against Texas Tech. This kid can play. Look at number 3, Lenore Sellers. You look at all these young quarterbacks, and you're trying, Arch, DJ Lagway, Sellers, where are you going to put them all? I think Sellers is one that is certainly very worthy of this rating upon further evaluation, 6'3", 242, the athletic ability and the running skills matched with that size. It's no secret, how effective he is, always falls forward and picks up yards. He has absurd pocket elusiveness, though. Very nice shiftiness at the second level as well. Shows good patience when he has a clean pocket, allowing a clean, fluid release. Shows good control while throwing on the run as well. Faced a peer pressure on every drop back versus Clemson. He was able to show good ball placement while being blitzed. Knew where his matchups were, and threw good footballs. Doesn't always go through his reads, but he definitely demonstrated football IQ. And of course, that weak offensive line could have made him a lot more antsy than he was. I think this is a great player here. Certainly needs to work on ball security. 11 fumbles, 7 picks. But Nick, if this guy had a better offensive line, man, he'd be picking people apart in all assets of the game. I think Sellers is certainly rated properly here at number 3.
Talk about sky-high potential. I think of the young quarterbacks that have limited tape on, I think Lenore Sellers deserves to be the highest ranked of them, plugging in here at number 3. I saw somebody on social media saying he's potentially be the number 1 overall pick in the draft next year, and I would agree with that potential. I think this guy can really develop and turn himself into a star here. This is an incredibly talented quarterback that could really be strong. I think the frame on him is just incredible. 6'3", about 240 on him right now. Could really be a solid runner. I think the arm strength is good. The second half of the season for him was magical. He had a really strong second half of the season. I look at the game against Missouri, 70% comp rate, 350 yards passing, 5 touchdowns. Impressive numbers there. 70% comp rate against Vanderbilt, 2 touchdowns. Same deal against A&M, 2 touchdowns, 240 yards passing. Even in a loss to Alabama, 238 yards passing, 75% comp rate, and 2 touchdowns. Had a bad interception in that game, but still overall a really strong performance. This is a kid that's really good on the ground as well. I think we're going to see him really break out those legs this year. 674 and 7 scores for him, including 166 and 2 scores against Clemson in a big win over their rival. That was a really strong performance. Didn't have the greatest bowl game against Illinois, but still a decent enough day with 260 yards passing, 70% comp rate, and a touchdown for him. I think you get the legs fully unleashed. You get better offensive line play potentially from the Gamecocks. Could really sort of uncork and develop this kid into a talent. I think the arm strength is really good. The accuracy is seemingly there. This kid could really develop into a star here. I think the legs are phenomenal. I think that part of his game is really polished. I think he'd be a really accurate passer as well. I'm excited to see what he can do in this offense. I think he's really talented. That dual threat ability is certainly there. You have to respect the run game, and he's a very strong passer that really looks well over the pocket and finds his targets. Develop the reads, develop the continuity of receivers a little bit more. This guy will easily be a top 3 quarterback in college football. There's a reason why you put him here. The sky-high potential here. I'm super excited to watch what Norris Sellers does this year.
Like at number 2, the Heisman favorite, Garrett Nussmeier. This is a guy that I've been high on for many years, Nick. He finally got the keys to the offense this past season. The numbers were good, right? He had over 4,000 passing yards, 29 touchdowns. But at times, I was pretty disappointed with his play, especially since he had the nation's best offensive line at his disposal. This is a guy that throws with some legit heat, though. Big-time arm. The ball placement's phenomenal. He's a gunslinger, type mentality, navigates the pocket well. I don't think his arm wavers at all on the run. He can throw too many lofting balls downfield instead of firing on a fine line. The vision can be poor. At times, he seems to get real lazy mentally when diagnosing coverage, and he can force things that are not there, leading to interceptions. You've seen that against Texas A&M, right? Hot in the first half, and the second half was abysmal. Ended up with 3 interceptions. The Baylor and USC games, I think the first and the last game of the year, examples of how good he can be in terms of just operating, all avenues of the field. The Ole Miss game, he completed 43%, but LSU, Nick, because they didn't have much of a run game all year, they just kept calling go routes in that game, and he just kept throwing it away. There was nowhere to go with the football. Ended up with 2 picks in that one as well. They blew that game. They should have beat Ole Miss at home that night. So there was at times where you certainly were disappointed with Nussmeier, but at the same time, Nick, they put a lot on his shoulders. We expected him to throw the ball a lot, but 40 times per game, I didn't expect to see that. When you have a gunslinger, though, you certainly want to give him the ball as much as possible. It was not ideal for LSU last year, and I think Nussmeier this year is going to really elevate his game in those weaknesses, and you're going to see an abundance of production.
Just a quick correction, LSU did beat Ole Miss in overtime, but that was a game that was certainly a lot closer than it should have been. But still, I think there were some mistakes in that game that certainly are worth noting. When you look at our 1 and 2 here, we'll talk about our number 1 player in a second. I think these two are 1 and 1A, in my opinion. These 2 quarterbacks are very similar and extremely close with each other. I'm sure you can figure out who's at number 1, considering we have not talked about them yet. I think Nussmeier has sky-high potential again. These are 2 guys that have proven that they can play at the top level, and Nussmeier has proven he can play at the top level. I think he's taken over the keys to the offense, and while at times times this season may have been a little disappointing for LSU, I think he still can really develop and turn into an absolute star quarterback, and I understand why he's the Heisman favorite right now. 4,000 yards passing last year is really strong, 64% comp rate, 29 touchdowns, all really good. The interceptions are certainly concerning. The film against A&M is certainly, definitely really raised some eyebrows in that one, despite the 400 yards passing. Was not great against Alabama either, or Florida for that matter, in 3 straight losses. I thought he was good against Baylor in the bowl game, 313 yards passing. 70% comp rate, 3 touchdowns in that one, was really solid against Oklahoma in the season finale as well. This is a guy that's got incredible arm strength, sometimes struggles at accuracy and throws the ball into positions that he probably shouldn't, which leads to turnovers here. If he can just focus, work on his reads a little bit here, be a little bit more accurate, take his time in the pocket, let the play develop. He has a phenomenal offensive line that'll protect him. He's a really strong player that can fire the ball downfield. When you look at, his lowest number of yards in a single game was 230 in a blowout win against Arkansas, so he can easily put up, 300 yards per game. I think that's really a reasonable expectation for him this year. This is an offense for LSU that should be sky high. Still has a really deep receiving room, and Nussmeier is a veteran quarterback that's been around the program for a while here, has really good strong arm, really solid deep ball, but just has to make sure the accuracy is there this year. If they can find a way to do that, LSU can certainly find a way to compete in the SEC.
Yeah, thank you for that correction, Nick. It was Ole Miss, a bit of a mental lapse there. Ole Miss is the one who ended up blowing that game, and that's why Nussmeier's percentage was low. That was a bit of an accurate statement. But he ended up playing very well late in that game. He led them downfield, game-tying touchdown, and then he threw a game winner to the late Kyron Lacey, so I appreciate that correction there. Moving to number 1, Cade Klubnik. This is a guy that we expected to really elevate his game this past year, but he did it to a completely different level than we expected. This guy was really the heart and soul for this football team for what was really a struggling offense, really for the past couple of years. But at times this year, they still struggled. Like the Louisville game was pretty disappointing. Against South Carolina, they left a lot on the table in that one. A big reason for that is Garrett Riley likes to just ruin things for this offense. So I think if he can use his brain a little bit more, Nick Klubnik can certainly lead this team to greater things this year. You've seen it against Texas, went on the road, 336 and 3 touchdowns. Against SMU, he had 262 and 4 score. Started that game hot, and they started to cool off. Consistency for this offense was hard to find, and you're certainly going to look at the quarterback when it comes to, getting in better rhythm in regard for 4 quarters, Nick. And I think that's the biggest knock on Klubnik right now, is trying to find that consistency. The production was great, though. This guy had 7 rushing touchdowns, 36 through the air, only 6 picks. He was more than a game manager for them. He was a great player in all regards, really, and they played a lot of close games. Again, things were iffy for times in the year for Clemson, Nick, and this is a guy that really willed them to victories. I think Klubnik, he's going to continue to emerge as the top quarterback in college football as an X5 star. That certainly is no joke one bit, and I think with the receivers around him at his disposal, you're going to see him certainly contend for a Heisman this year.
I think he'll certainly be in contention. Like I said, when we talk about Nussmeier here, I think these two quarterbacks are 1 and 1A. You really could pick your favorite here, interchangeable. I think there's a clear gap between the top 2 and the next 3 through 5. And in my opinion, this is a clear number 1 and number 2. These two guys, I think, are leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of the field, Nussmeier and Klubnik. It really just depends on who you want to pick as your favorite. And both of us picked Klubnik here, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Why? 36 passing touchdowns last year to 6 interceptions, 3,600 yards passing, 63% comp rate. Had the 7 rushing touchdowns as well. I think the bad was certainly concerning, right? Did not look good against South Carolina in a loss, looked poor against Louisville in a loss, and certainly did not look good at all against Georgia in a bad loss early in the season. But I think the good really stands out. Had a 92% comp rate on 26 attempts against App State, 378 yards and 5 touchdowns in a blowout win there. Had a really good performance against Stanford as well, even if the accuracy wasn't phenomenal. Still had 4 touchdowns and 255 yards. Looked good against Wake, 75% comp rate, 3 touchdowns and 300 yards passing. Same deal against UVA with 3 touchdowns and 300 yards passing in that one. I think the potential continue to develop here. Dabo is really starting to mold this guy. Him and Riley got another year to work together, develop and build that offensive system. I think they can really put together a strong offense here that can really develop around Cade Klubnik. I think this is a kid that can really have an incredible season. I'm buying in on him as well right now. I think he could really make a lot of sense as a Heisman winner. He's not the same level as Trevor Lawrence, but I think he's certainly as close as Clemson's gotten in the last couple of years, and he's an X5 star for a reason. That's finally hitting his stride here. I think Klubnik will have a phenomenal season, and I think he's in line to be the best quarterback in college football. He's a really strong athlete and playing really good football right now. He's the number 1 quarterback in college football for me.
That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.